Hi, I'm Larry Conger, and I'm here in my studio today to talk about sound reinforcement for the mountain dulcimer. I'm asked quite often by players how to best amplify their dulcimer. Well, since the instrument has a very soft voice, sound reinforcement can be tricky. The most obvious solution is to mic the instrument. However, this may not always get the job done. What I dislike about miking the dulcimer is that you run the risk of having the sound system feed back if the volume is pushed too high. I have a very light touch on the dulcimer, and because of that, sound men are forced to raise the gain so high that I'm constantly at the point of feeding back. Well, I fought the feedback for several years before I decided to take control of my own sound reinforcement. The last straw was an outdoor wedding on a windy day. I had to play, even though the microphone I was using had a windscreen. The sound of the wind blowing across the microphone was like thunder in the distance when amplified through the speaker. I noticed that folks kept looking up into the sky to see if there were any rain clouds approaching. Well, that's when I began looking for alternatives to miking my dulcimers. The solution I found that works best for me was to have pickups installed in each of my instruments. The folks at the Dulcimer shop in Mountain View, Arkansas have done this work for me over the years on all of my McSpadden dulcimers. The pickup is actually built into the bridge of the instrument. If you will look closely, you can see the brass-colored pickup mounted in the bridge. The device is almost invisible and doesn't detract from the aesthetic quality of the dulcimer, nor does it alter the instrument's acoustic characteristics. A wire is fed through a small hole underneath the pickup and attached to a jack mounted at the end of the dulcimer. The jack will accept a standard 1/4-inch guitar cord. All that is needed now is to plug in the instrument, adjust the volume, and begin playing. I began test driving several amplifiers to see which ones sounded the best with my dulcimers. The local music store let me take a few out on approval whenever I had a local job to play. I quickly discovered that the small practice amps were not sufficient for my needs. In a large room, the gain had to be turned up so high that the instrument began to sound processed, much like an electric guitar. After all, these little units were designed to amplify electric guitars and not acoustic instruments. They were also designed for practice and not performance. Well, about this time, several companies began marketing amps that were specifically designed for acoustic instruments. There were no bells and whistles on these amps to color the sound. Instead, the goal was to produce a natural acoustic sound. Well, I eventually bought this Peavey Acoustic Model 112, which has 100 watts of power and one 12-inch speaker. It lived up to its name and has seen a lot of use over the 15 years or so that I've used it, and I still use it some today. My only complaint is that it weighs 45 pounds and is a beast to carry around. It has two inputs that will accommodate two dulcimers or one dulcimer and one microphone. Both channels have EQ so that I can dress the low and high frequencies just like I want them. The only effect on the amp is a reverb so that I can fatten up my sound just a little bit. One neat feature about this amp is that it has a line out on the back that allows me to run my signal into a second sound system if necessary. After several years of hauling this big boy around, I decided to downsize and purchase one of Peavey's newer models, the acoustic E208. That's the one here on the floor. I really like this little amp, not only for its compact size, but also for the quality of the sound it generates. My dulcimers sound great through this little amp. At first, I was skeptical that it wouldn't meet all of my needs. However, after playing in a church a couple of years ago that seated about 450 people, I was pleasantly surprised. It was everything I needed and more. This little amp has two 8-inch speakers and weighs half as much as its big brother. It has 30 watts of power, much more powerful than those little practice amps I mentioned earlier, which have only 12 to 15 watts of power. It has all the features of the bigger amp in a much more compact enclosure. The best part is that it's affordable, currently selling for about $175. One footnote, there is also a smaller model called the E08 that has one 8-inch speaker and weighs about 16 pounds. It currently sells for around $130. Although I've never had any experience with this little amp, its 20 watts of power tells me that it would most likely be sufficient for all of my needs. Just like the bigger brown amp I talked about earlier, the E208 that I'm using has 2 separate channels that can accommodate 2 dulcimers or 1 dulcimer and 1 microphone. Each channel has EQ knobs so that I can dress my sound any way I like it. A built-in reverb is also handy to add some depth to my sound whenever I want it. If I had a complaint about this amp, it would be that the print indicating each knob's function is a bit too small to read, especially in low light situations. Whenever I'm certain that the venue I'm going to be playing for has a quality sound system that I can use, I'll leave my amp at home and instead take my direct box with me. The one I have here is manufactured by LR Bags, the same company that makes the pickups installed in each of my dulcimers. It's a great alternative to a heavy amplifier, and it fits easily into a gig bag. This little item, commonly called a DI box, converts the sound from a high impedance line level signal that's common with most guitars to a low impedance signal used by most microphone inputs. What this does for me is to allow me to plug my dulcimer directly into my direct box and then send a signal from the DI by way of a microphone cable to the house sound system. In addition, I have several EQ knobs on the box which help me to balance the low and high frequencies just the way I like them before sending the signal to the sound man. After all, many sound men have never even seen a dulcimer, much less amplified one. So I have the advantage of dressing my sound for the inexperienced sound man. I can also dictate how much volume I send to the sound man. Now this is helpful when the sound man tends to turn your volume up way too loud. Sound reinforcement for the dulcimer can be a challenging task. I hope that this short video has given you some ideas on how you can go about getting the sound you want from your dulcimer whenever you play music in public. Remember that it's important to take control of your sound reinforcement and not depend on someone else to do the job for you. Having that control will help you feel more comfortable in a public setting, which should translate into a more musical performance. Thanks for watching.